Mia, and you are here for another session of Lead Beyond Limits Live, where we call things out, right? We pull back the curtain and we lean into the work of leadership. And we do that through the lens of wonderful people like my guest today, teachers who are dedicated in this work, Kristen Wallace. And so, welcome, Kristen. We're super excited to have you. Um, and so, today's topic, everybody, is when teachers lead to a lesson in influence. And I found this to be so applicable for our conversation with Kristen tonight, Miss Wallace. I call her Wallace tonight. So tonight's episode is going to hit a little differently. Okay. We're talking to an educator who didn't just show up for her students, right? She showed up for me, right? She was the kind of teacher who challenged my thinking. She asked tough questions, and she really helped make me a better leader, right? And these are the type of adults that you want in your building. When I tell you the adults who are going to ask the tough questions and make you think, this is Wallace. And so get your thinking caps on, get your writing books out, right? Wallace, you've been in this game for what, 15 years now? I can't hear you. Wait. I'm sorry, that's me.
Yeah,
How long have you been in this game?
Total.
17 years. So after 17 years in education, she's doing what she once said she would never do, which is now she's teaching math. So, and she's crushing it. Okay. So we're going to hear a little bit about that tonight too. So before we get started, I want you to grab your Lead Beyond Limits Confidence and Clarity workbooks now. Yes, now, because this conversation will stir up some reflection. It's going to challenge your leadership lens and spark some ideas for your next steps. So use this time and space so that you can actually use your workbook to capture those moments. You will definitely want to revisit those moments. So let's get into it and welcome our guest to Lead Beyond Limits. Welcome, Kristen Wallace. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. So let's start where most people don't want to. Right? Where things fall apart. Mm-hmm. So every educator has moments when things don't go as planned. Well, first, before I jump into the question, and maybe, no, I'll go into the question because you and I, when we get together and have conversations, they always are rich. Yeah. So I don't need to talk about in our conversations, in your response to the questions, please include who you are, when you got started teaching, and really what prompted you. Let's start there. What prompted you to become a teacher in the first place, Wallace, before I even get to that first question?
That's crazy because I never wanted to be a teacher. It was never on the lens. I went to school I was an advertising and marketing major. Wow. And I wanted to be rich and have a business suit. That Whitney Houston song, I Will Always Love You with the pinstripe, that was my outfit. But then in college, I was a substitute teacher for different grade levels, and I was a nanny in a home that I'm still very close to. And so I've noticed throughout my life, I've always been around children. Like even as a young girl, I was the babysitter of all the cousins. I was the one who helped all the littles with their homework. I had my little brother writing his name by 3 years old. But it was never something that I thought that I could do or even wanted to do until I subbed one year. And I was in this particular fourth grade math teacher's class, and he had taught his children 21 Blackjack as a mental math strategy, as a rounding and predicting strategy. And because of my rapport with these kids, I became their sub every time he was out and fell completely in love with this idea of young people and learning and just how their little minds worked and being able to get in there with them. And I remember the impact this man had on these children, where they ran the classroom. Like as the sub, they told me where everything was. They told me how everything was supposed to go. They told me the expectation. So I just literally sat back and managed what they were doing. And so I realize now I've modeled so much after this man I've never met. This classroom, I probably was in a half a dozen times, but that was such a profound impact on me that I then, once I graduated, applied to TFA. They didn't want me, and that was okay because Baltimore BCTR did. And so I ended up coming through them thinking, I'm going to do this for 5 years. I just need 5 years, and I'll figure out my real career. And that was, 15 years ago.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And the impact, like you said, that it had on you, just being a participant of this system and
Mm-hmm.
relationships that he built in the classroom. That's amazing. That is really amazing. Thank you for sharing that story.
Absolutely.
And y'all, 17 years later, when I tell you this woman's a teacher, well, let me tell you, when we were preparing for this conversation, show him your pad,
This
Wallace.
is,
Show him
I
your
took
pad.
a couple of notes because I shall never be on the cuff. I will always, even if it looks unorganized, it is a high level of organization.
I absolutely love that about you. When I tell you this is the woman here in terms of planning and preparation, absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. And I also picked up this sense of like innovation, like
Mm-hmm.
how to teach in a really effective way by allowing the
Mm-hmm.
students to lead the learning,
Mm-hmm.
but also putting things in place where they're learning outside the box,
Right.
right? Instead of this very
Yep.
linear way that we have right
Yep.
now. So every educator has its moments when things don't go planned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a time when you experienced a major setback in your teaching career, and what did you learn from it?
Absolutely. So I thought about this one pretty hard, and I was like, what is the thing that molded me to the now? When I left my first school, I just knew I needed some new challenges. And so I went to a school where I had been this reading, writing, I could teach a rock to read. I love creative writing, like reading. I taught math in a way that was enough to meet what needed to meet, but reading was my passion.
Right.
I go to this new school, and at the end of the interview, after I've already accepted the job, it's oh, by the way, it's a fourth grade math position. And I was like, oh, well, I don't teach math. So anything else available. And he's like, well, actually, you do teach math. You've been, I wasn't departmentalized at the time. So you've been teaching math for years.
Right.
And then that principal reassured me. He said, you'll be able to just teach math and focus on math. So everything you're doing in reading, you'll be able to do that in math.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember starting that school year with this mindset of, I don't teach math. I am not good at math. I do not like math. I struggle with math in high school. I struggle with math in college. I created my major to avoid math classes. Reading was my thing. Writing was my thing. And so now I'm thrown into this position where I'm at a school where all the teachers are really, really strong teachers. And this math department I was told, you are now a medium-sized fish in a huge pond. You are now in a place where everyone's pretty good. So if you are mediocre, you're now going to stand out. So that got me to kind of step my game up in a way that I didn't have to before. Like I could do enough, and enough was pretty good. So, okay. But now it's everyone's going above and beyond. All the bulletin boards are Pinterest ready. Everyone's doing something new they just discovered off of this site. Like I now had to step it all the way up. I made the mistake of saying too many times, I'm not a math teacher. So I'm I'm here, but I'm not a math teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And around the middle of the year, my test scores were not very good at all, probably the lowest in the section. And I remember the principal saying, that's okay. You don't really teach math. You don't really like math. And I remember being offended. Excuse you, I'm a teacher and I'm a math teacher. And to hear someone else say the thing that I've been saying about myself, and now I'm realizing that's how my colleagues are starting to treat me. Well, she doesn't really teach math. So and if I do anything, it's gonna have to be great. Like I'm not one of those, I either excel or I quit and you never know I did it. But if I'm going to do this thing, like it has to now be. And so I realized how like depressed it was making me, that I am struggling. I am far behind my colleagues. My data isn't great. My kids aren't excelling. I don't understand this math. Like even as an adult, this math is confusing to me. I wasn't taking the time to dive into it the way I dove into my reading curriculum, my writing curriculum. And so I took that summer and I read the curriculum page to page, front to back. He sent us to some math conferences and we took notes and we brought back and we discussed. And I determined at that point, I realized I did this to me. Yeah. I told people and I set this up for myself. And it was going to take me another year and a half before I was able to shake the stigma that I put on myself. And I allowed me to bring me down. And so it took me probably another year before my colleagues started to see me as a contender in sorts, as a stronger math teacher, as someone able to reach my kids. And so I vowed to myself, I'll never put that out there again. I'll never start with my weaknesses, start with the things that I don't do well. Instead, just work on them. But that's the thing I'm working on in the closet, the thing I'm working on in the dark. But I was determined that I was going to do this thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. People, are you picking up what she's putting down right now? I need you all to, if you're listening to the replay, give a thumbs up if you are, really, if what she's saying is really resonating with you. What I heard you say, what it made me think about, what you were doing is you were forced. First, you put yourself there, right? This mindset shift had to happen. And it takes time for that to occur. Like, it's not an overnight process, because it took years for you to get to where you were at the point where you felt you weren't good at math, right? Yeah. But then you were placed in a situation where now you're like, okay, other people are saying this about me. I can talk about me. It's kind of like, with your family. I'm the only one who talks about my family. You can't talk about my family.
Exactly.
Right? So now you're hearing it, and that's pushing some buttons for you, right?
Yep.
And so that discomfort is really the thing that helped push you to 10x your knowledge of math and the curriculum. That is absolutely beautiful. And there's so many parallels to that. It's for leaders or anyone in the education system who is listening. Like, you are a work in progress. Perfect is never your goal, right? Like, and to keep yourself around people who do things better than you is always the goal. Yes. Like, you should never be the smartest person in the room, right? Because if you are, you need to change your environment in order for you to grow. I love that you saw that about yourself, and it's kind of like you actually could see yourself coming out on the other side because you put these things in place. Beautiful. Beautiful. So failure is often the best teacher. And I'm using the word failure. I hear people say, don't say the word fail. Listen, okay, with these uber sensitive words and stuff. Failure is often the best teacher if we reflect, right? Because you could have stayed down that path of, I feel bad about myself, but you decided to do something about it, right? So what you shared your mind shifts and your strategies that you use to help turn your setback into a learning opportunity, which is absolutely wonderful. What could you share? And this is off the cuff a little. So what could you share with leaders who are listening right now? What is the one thing that you think that leader did that really helped propel you, that you would say to a school leader right now?
Right. The biggest for me is that level of honesty that we tend to not have up to down, right? Like, we'll be honest with our colleagues and what we consider our peers. But when it comes to almost a top down, we want to sugarcoat it. We want to be careful with feelings. But those difficult conversations aren't always argumentative or combative. It's done in a way that I'm telling you this to build you up. Granted, it can't happen without a relationship, right? Like, a stranger can't tell me that I'm going to cry, and I'm a sensitive being. So, and he knew that. And so we could, this particular principal was very empathetic and very compassionate. We often had to drag what he perceived to be negativity, but it dragged out of him, because he was very much like, I love this thing. He would say, this is the thing that is your weakness, but this is your strength. So I'm going to play on your strength. I'm going to make your weakness, I'm going to pad it in a way. So if you're struggling with classroom management, we had a math teacher who was one of the smartest humans I've ever met in my life, was brilliant. And her approach to children, they were humans. Like, who knew? They were these young people that had voices, and she had them talking and speaking, and from the outside in, it looked argumentative, but they were simply able to say, she would say, sit down. And a child would say, my leg hurts, I'd rather stand up. But the fact that they felt confident enough to not yell and scream and spiral, but to talk back. But then her management struggles. And so I remember she going to him and begging, like, what can I do about my management? What can I do? And he said, you've been teaching for a while. The fact that you're still struggling with management, it may just be an area you're not strong in. Right. So instead of keep harping and you spiraling out on that, you're this amazing math teacher. He put an aide in her room to help with the management so that she could really focus on teaching. Yeah. And so this aide took care of a lot of those issues that she was becoming depressed about, she had anxiety about. The aide took care of that. And so he really gave us these wonderful spaces to help us with our weaknesses in a way that wasn't constantly crashing us out, but then reminding us constantly what our strengths were. We walked away from conversation with him knowing for a fact what we were doing well.
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. So that's a really good example of how leadership behaviors helped you bounce back from a challenge, right? So playing on the strengths as opposed to the challenges that a teacher is having in the classroom. I love that. So a lot of leaders struggle to create a culture where failure isn't feared, right? Like there's this culture, unfortunately, in a lot of schools, especially in the public school system, where failure is seen as something like you're on a performance improvement plan. You're not doing well, like you're about to get fired. A performance improvement plan means you're going to get fired, right? And it really should not. That should never be the case. So a lot of school leaders, struggle to create this culture where failure shouldn't be feared. Like it should be something that's welcome as a stepping stone. What advice would you give leaders who want to build the mindset of their staff to move away from this concept of failure is fear, like being fearful of that?
I thought this question particularly was very powerful in that we are, especially my generation, we don't live. We were always told how bad failure is, that you didn't want to be a failure. It's seen as a weakness almost. But then we're also told on the other side how that's how you get stronger. And so being able to pinpoint it, to say what it is, like, are we having conversation with our teachers? Are we sitting them down and having them self-reflect? Are we giving them that feedback so that they know? I feel like a lot of our teachers don't know the areas that they're failing in. They are walking in thinking things are going completely fine because no one told me it wasn't. No one said it was a problem. This year, I have not put up a single bulletin board all year. Haven't done it. Just have my main one up, and there wasn't a bunch of work on the outside. This was up until January. I get to my mid-year, and I say my goal for myself is I need to put up more classroom work. And my principal's reaction was like, pretty much, "Whoo, I'm glad you're doing it." And I remember thinking, had you just told me at any point that I would like to see this, I would have done it. Had I known at any point that this was an expectation that I wasn't meeting, I would have gladly. Granted, I would have had a moment of, something more difficult, self-reflection, maybe, me as a sensitive, little tears. I'm gonna cry through it. But if I don't know that it's an issue, and I feel like a lot of my colleagues, we simply aren't aware that we're not meeting an expectation, or that this area is indeed an issue. We're coming in every day thinking we are plugging along, thinking we are doing the Lord's work. And as a matter of fact, you should be lucky that we're here. So it doesn't matter that I'm doing the minimum because I showed up. And so it really takes that shared vision to be able to sit me down and say, like, this is what I need from you. This is what, as a school community, this is what I need from us as teachers. And a lot of principals think they're saying it and believe that, well, I said it last year. Teachers just know. You've been teaching for 17 years. Why wouldn't you know there needs to be a bulletin board up? Because I'm focusing on multiplication. So that became my priority this year. And that one bulletin board outside of my classroom fell at the sideway. So I don't always see us having very direct conversations with individuals, especially as adults. I think we fear sensitivity. I think we fear offending.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're all walking around thinking that everything's fine.
Yeah.
And the moment I found out it's not, all I can think is, had we had this conversation a while ago, it wouldn't have gotten this bad. It wouldn't have gotten this far. Yeah. I could be doing small groups that last however long. So the first thing is really having that direct conversation.
Yeah. People, when I tell you that what Wallace just shared with you is so profound, especially for me as a leader, like when I first started working with Wallace, it was my first experience as a principal, and it was a large elementary school, right? It was a pretty large elementary school. It was my first experience. I had leadership roles in different ways, but never of a public school that large, or never of a public school, period. And so there was a huge learning curve for me. And one of the things that Wallace really helped me see clearer was that my communication had to be stronger. It had to be clearer because I walked in thinking, and I mentioned this too in my book, is, when you walk in thinking that people automatically understand what you're saying because they're in the same field you're in, because we're both educators, you should know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. So Wallace really helped me refine and get clearer on how I'm communicating with people. To this day, I still work on that. Mm-hmm. Like it's still a work in progress for me because I default to this. I think people understand what I'm talking about. But Wallace is one of the teachers in that building who really helped shape my thinking in terms of communication. Because let me tell you something. I go and say something to Wallace and she'd be like, I don't understand.
I have questions.
I have questions. And in my mind, like, honestly, I would be thinking, okay, after the second or third round of questions, in my mind, I'm like, okay, damn, Demia. This wasn't wasn't clear.
Right. This is what I said. This is what I heard. And they're almost never the same thing.
Right. Absolutely. So I want you, if you have your clarity and confidence workbook, your LBO workbook, this is a moment that you should be writing something down in terms of your reflection and strategic planning moving forward. Okay. Because this is a nugget right here. The clarity in your communication is absolutely essential. They don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And you have to tell them over and over again. Yes. I don't care how many times you think you told them once, you told them last year, they should remember. I told them last quarter, they should remember. No, you need to tell them all the time, right? Because they got things that they're doing. They got kids and families and planning and all their personal life. They got things that are going on where they're human. So they're going to need that, that consistent and clear communication. So thank you so much for dropping that nugget, Wallace. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit. You've been teaching for 17 years. Wow. You've been teaching for 17 years.
Right.
Wow. That's so dope. Okay. So that's a whole lot of growth, right? There's a lot of growth. It's a lot of challenges that you've experienced and change, right? Because you moved to different schools. How has your definition of success evolved over time? Yes. And how has failure shaped that new definition of success?
So for someone like me, I am from a very tiny rural county in Charles City, in Virginia, called Charles City, born and raised. Our roots back to the plantation that's sitting there. So I am this, just really like even moving to Baltimore was gigantic, right? The first one to go to college, the first one to move out, all of my family is back in Richmond. And so that became this need to like prove this to myself. And the growth that I've seen in myself from then till now, for me personally, has been exponential, where initially it was denial. Well, if it didn't happen, it wasn't my fault. It didn't happen. If small group, if it's December and I still don't have small group, well, it's because, the class is like this and I'm doing this and it's too much. And so I remember having an outside source come in to tighten up on our math scores at next score. We were putting in the work, but our math scores were barely inching up from interim to interim. And I remember him sitting down and we made something called a heat map, where you looked at the students' progress and you could predict where they should be by the next assessment. And so we did our predictions, we took the assessment, and then we compared the data. And I remember him looking at me and asking, well, why didn't they move? Like these 6 kids that should have moved, they're some of your brightest, they didn't move, why? And I remember I was like, he hurt my feelings. Like, what do you mean why? Because they didn't. Because in the back of my mind, because I'm not a good teacher, because I suck as a human, because I am not a great person, that's why they failed. And so I have like tears in my eyes, and he can see that I'm about to break, I'm about to crack. And he was like, no, did you ask them? I was like, what do you mean did I ask them? They're 9. Like, why would I ask them? Why didn't they do well? And he was like, so then how do you know? Like, how do you know? You did small group. They did well on the quizzes. And so that changed my own mindset of what I thought failure was, right? Like failure, there was only one reason to fail, because you were inadequate. There was no other reason that You don't reach a goal. There's no other reason why life doesn't turn out. I took that really personal.
Yeah.
So instead, I looked back. Oh, she's missed 4 days. She was sick for a week and a half. She missed this bit of content. Oh, this child hasn't been doing homework. I need to meet with her to find out what's going on with homework. Oh, her mom works nights now, and so she's struggling to do homework and breakfast. Like, I was taking things so incredibly personal and not doing the work to reflect. And so what I see now as failure are just things I really haven't planned. I haven't tightened up on this yet, right? Like I haven't focused in on this yet. My babies took the rounding quiz. They still can't round. Okay. We do a little more practice. Like, it's no longer this thing that's so difficult for me to face. Like, I feel like for me, facing it was my biggest growth point. I now can sit and see it. I can see my data not moving. I can compile the data and face the data. I can look at my babies and see that I didn't plan very good this week. This whole week, poor kids, got you next week. Like, I can now have that level of reflection that I didn't have before, because I saw it as my teaching was such an extension of Kristen, that for my children to not move means I did something wrong. When that was the case, there were things I needed to tighten up on. And so it became the reflection of, I can do a better job of kids in small group. I can do a better job of accountability for homework. And so now I'm of the mindset, when I see the ebbs and flows in data, when I see the ebbs and flow in behavior, attitude, whatever it is, to pinpoint it, to see it, to face it, which was my hardest part, and then to make a plan and see how it goes next time. So I'm not crashing the way I used to at all.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I absolutely love that. And it speaks to the fact that, data isn't personal. Like, let me take that back. Because you are so, and this is for anyone who is so deeply rooted in the work, right? It's easy to take the data personally. But once you get past that hump, like you did, and you're looking at that data, it really is an objective tool to identify where there may be some gaps and, things that need to change or pivot. So I'm so glad that you were able to do that. And now you're using the data truly as a tool that it's meant to be used for. Can you share with us one piece of advice that you would give a first-year teacher about setbacks?
Yes, I made a list. Thing one.
Get your pen out. Get your stuff out. Educators, get your stuff out, okay?
Things I wish someone had told me. Celebrate those wins. You are not doing everything wrong. There are lots of things going right. Let's pinpoint them. Say it specifically. You are coming to work every day on time. Yes, beautiful. You are using your planning time and you are ahead in your calendar. There are, of all the things that perceptually aren't going well, there are lots of incredible things happening. These first-year teachers and this generation coming up are so bright and so innovative, and they have a level of empathy and compassion that I didn't get until much later. And they are starting with those things. They are starting with connections and relationships. Like, I am seeing stronger culture, like stronger classroom culture now than I ever saw 10 years ago when I started.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that balance is there. Like, the intellectual work is there. The relationship building is there. Celebrate that. Call it out. Pinpoint it. Walk away knowing that working on this, but I do these 5 things incredibly well. Point 2. Setting realistic
I love that.
Right? Like, we are expecting as a first year. So what I'm seeing from a lot of my newer teachers is they were very bright in high school. They were very bright in college. They excelled at so much of what they did. And now they are adults. They are away from home for the first time, or they're career changers. So this is a brand new field for them. They're expecting to have the same success day one that they had in this thing they did for 5 years. And that's just not how life works. That's not how skills work. And so they are deflated very quickly because they feel like they're failing. They're not seeing it as they're learning. No, you're learning, you're gaining experience. And in a few more days, a few more practices, you're going to get better. So having them set realistic expectations that you're going to why are we giving 10,000 pieces of homework every single night to a teacher that's already overwhelmed, that's already having to lesson plan? Like, that's not a realistic expectation. We are
That's right.
expecting the same thing this first year teacher to do that the 10-year teacher is doing. We want to have these bulletin boards up, this small group running, this. Those aren't realistic, right? Like, they are learning how to put a lesson plan together.
Right.
And so really setting realistic, attainable goals for them and then inching them up every time so they're getting those skills. Be ready for those difficult conversations because they have to happen. They're going to happen from parents. They're going to happen from your coworkers. They're going to happen from the kids. And we have to toughen up a little bit because if not, people are going to be afraid to talk to you. And
Yeah.
once they're afraid to tell you the truth, it's a wrap. Like, once people are no longer able to talk with you because they fear you're going to fall apart, you're not going to bounce back the same way. They're going to stop having them. And for me, that's such a detriment. Like, that's the part where you're not able to grow past it because no one's willing to sit you down and tell you the things that could really benefit you if you heard them.
Yeah, that is so key. Oh my goodness, yes.
And last but not least, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Share.
Celebrate the bounce back. The thing they didn't do well quarter one, that you're excelling quarter two, that's just as amazing. We're not going to do it right the first time, but it's not going to be perfect the first time.
Right.
We should expect it to be. So the thing that you struggle with, turning assessments on time. I had a baby. She was a grown woman that could not get those first quarter assessments in on time at all. Quarter two, she had one quiz and on time, and she had a $5 Dunkin' Donuts gift card. Like, yes, proud of you. Do this thing. By quarter three, we had more. So that was a thing that we were working on. That was an area that we were working on. And just something that small to be able to celebrate her. So it's the growth, it's the progress.
Yeah.
Are we celebrating those things? Are we celebrating when a person is overcoming a failure, overcoming a weakness, overcoming a hardship? Are we celebrating that with the same energy we had when we pointed it out? When we had that conversation, are we having those overcome progress conversations? Are we having them with just as much energy?
Yeah, I love that. And what I heard was a mix between, like, this is what school leaders can do, right? Like, part of it is school leaders need to do this too. But I think school leaders must celebrate, period, right? They have to celebrate. And I love how you describe, knowing your staff and knowing what their capacity is in that moment and building, right? So it's kind of like in teaching when you're chunking. You have to build on top of, the previous learning and knowledge that the student has. So it's the same thing with school leaders working with teachers. And I love that you are sharing that, as an educator, as a teacher, you really need to celebrate yourself too, celebrate your wins. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, and this is the case, is we may not get the kudos from outside. As a teacher, you may have a school leader who doesn't do kudos, right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just going to leave it here. I believe school leaders should celebrate everything, all staff in a building when they make progress and growth. However, we have some schools where that does not happen. That does not mean that you as an educator stop doing what you should be doing for kids, right? Because an adult is not providing a kudos or a shout out for you, right? Like, so I love that you are providing them with ways to, to reflect on the progress and growth that you have made. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Are there any suggestions that you have or any experiences that you've had with school leaders who have done this in a really effective way that you can maybe share with some folks?
Yeah.
Or ideas that you have?
Yes, definitely. I spent very little time out of the classroom. I think like 2 years as a math coach and some time as a BCTR new teacher coach. And so really learning, one, what new teachers need, and what a new teacher needs is completely different than what a vet teacher needs. Found it out the hard way. First year as a coach and having to rally a 10-year teacher in the same way I'm rallying a virtual online first year teacher, and how apples and oranges. And so it really is knowing people. Like, you really have to know people in a way of how they receive praise, like how they receive, because for one person, calling them out in public is mortifying. Please don't do that. But then for someone else, putting a blurb in the bottom of an email isn't enough either. And so really knowing how someone receives that love and how someone gives it, but then that clarity with them of this is how we celebrate. Like this is how we do this. This is how we um are going to address what we need to address. And I can't iterate enough the need to say it, the need to face it, and the need to say it. We I feel like we think we say it. We think we said it. We believe we said it, and we might have said it. But as you said earlier with the teacher, there are literally 50 other things going on in my head when you said it. I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. And if you never said it again for the rest of the year, I immediately forgot, because that said to me it wasn't important to you. So if it's not important to you to say it again, I didn't need to retain it in the 10,000 other things that are going on in my head. And so some really great, just not even principals, but like leaders, assistant principals, math leads, just to have that. I remember I went to a school with no walls, bless it, and would come in not to evaluate, not to check my objectives, but just to sit down. Like he just wanted to sit down for a minute, and he would hear something being said, he'd make a note, he'd leave. What's going on? And then another teacher would come around the corner with him. He's like, look at this thing that's happening. Explain it to me. And so the person would say, and he was like, oh, this is what this is. And he's like, I like this. And he would go grab his camera, go grab a video, and make you do it again and record it to say, I like this. I want to share this. Let's see if others are on this. And so you leave with such a sense of like, okay. And he would constantly send us videos of other teachers in the building doing this snippet, the way they did their call to attention, a picture of their where their bulletin board charted individual progress, like the way their conference paper, little things that you would get a group text of this thing. Look how this is being done. This is just an idea. Like, so now I'm seeing what my school is doing. I'm seeing what my team is doing. And I'm the extremely competitive type person. We're like, great, match it. Like, great. We want to make whoever's in charge, whoever that is, we want to make them happy, right? Like we want to be seen as we're doing a good job. And so if I don't know what that looks like, I don't know what that means to you, I don't know what you need from me, there's a constant bit of confusion from us where we're not quite certain. And so we're either going to do extra stuff that doesn't need to be done that you don't value, or we'll do nothing, thinking I don't know what you need anyway. And so that biggest, for me, the advice is to say the things, put it out there, have that strong vision, and to make sure you're reiterating.
Girl.
We're saying it over and over again.
Right.
In a way that makes it important. In a way that definitely makes it important. Breaking into smaller parts. I wrote this down too. I wrote this. This is what I wrote down. Well, this is the advice to my younger self. No, I'm sorry. That's the next question. So I'm not skipping.
Wait, okay. So everyone, I hope you are listening. Like what the example that she just gave of like what she's experienced from a leader, and her, like how she has shared, her tactics for supporting and celebrating the people that she's coaching are really, like, these are things that you could walk away with and start to implement in your buildings or whatever role or capacity you're in right now. Like the idea of taking, because a lot of times teachers feel like people come in the classroom for, I got you. But when you're going in there and you're seeing good stuff and you want to record it and share it, you build your own internal library of like strategies and moves of effective teaching. That's golden. I hope you're catching this in your clarity and confidence workbook. Okay. Golden nuggets being dropped. Okay. So you've dropped a lot of wisdom tonight, and for both teachers and leaders. And you'll notice for you watching the replay or listening live that we're talking about operating from this place of failure and how failure leads into success, right? Because a lot of times, like, that's what our educators are experiencing right now. And we need to pull them out of that because we need them. And it's not to say, and I've heard some educators say like, no, we just need to get rid of them. No, they're there because they want to be there. And if you have people who want to be there, our job is to train them, support them, give them the time and space that they need to grow, right? And so Wallace has just, shared with us her experiences, and in her story, she's modeled, like she's saying exactly how those things can occur. So Wallace, if you could go back and give advice to your younger self about growth and failure, what would you say to your younger self?
There's a quote that I have labeled myself a realistic optimist, which is a nice way of saying I'm a really nice pessimist. Where I'm just like, it's all or nothing. You likely know this about me, as we've had that, but where I'm like, black or white, nothing else exists. It's either this or it's this, and nothing else in between can exist. And therapy has really helped me see things in that kind of middle, that gray area, to not just compartmentalize it and then label it and don't face it again. And so to my younger self, especially around failure and growth, I am the type that I don't face it. Like, I didn't face those problems. I didn't see what was wrong. I remember my very first principal pulling me up. And I remember my personal life, I was spiraling. I was having some really traumatic things happen at home and was just slipping. And my first principal, bless her, pulled me up and said, I love you. You are wonderful. Get it together. Like, you are coming late. It is becoming unacceptable. You know, what's going on. We talked it out. And like, that was something that type of conversation with a principal had never happened. You're only my second principal, but neither here nor there. So like, I didn't have that experience. I was very young at the time as well. I think I was 24, which is young. And my first adult experience outside of home, like my first time away from home and being incredibly away from it and dealing with everything on my own inside and out. And I wish to tell myself then to be gentle to her. Like, girl, you are doing your thing. You are being incredible. To also reach out sooner when things like that are happening. I did have people in my life and people in place. And you were one of the ones that grabbed me up in that time. There's someone else that, like, as I'm falling, to grab me to make that halt, and looking at that younger self and looking at that young girl, telling her that it's going to be okay. Like, with everything going on, with everything that I thought was going on, the way the parents were, the way some of the kids were, that make a plan, like, take a look at it, evaluate it, make a plan. Like, it doesn't have to stay like this. It doesn't have to be like this. My kids aren't moving. I have to teach math. I hate math. I'm overwhelmed. I'm taking classes, trying to get my master's. A lot of stuff's happening at once. Deep, and I wrote this down as well. Break it into smaller parts. You don't have to be the world's greatest teacher, Dade City.
That's right. That's right.
And I wish I did that with the second school. And I could have been such a more impactful teacher at the first school had I set myself 3 goals. Now every year, I only set 3 goals. It's only 3 big things I'm doing every year, and that's it. And whatever else gets done, great. Whatever else doesn't get done, it's not going to be the detriment of the kids ever. And so then I've mastered 3 things every year. So now the next year, I can easily put these 3 things in place from last year, and now I have 3 other things. And so this idea of failure and success, really looking at, they're not 2 different things. They're not black and white. They're not apples and oranges. They're actually this really intermeshed, completely tangled up, and it's difficult to separate them. So this thing that I thought was a failure, it really wasn't. It was a setback. It was a minor delay. It was a learning opportunity, but it really wasn't a failure in the sense of nothing broke. Nothing was unfixable. Nothing was unchangeable. And that's not how my mindset used to be. It used to be, throw it in. I was literally ready to quit. Like, if I had moved second school, I was going to figure out, like, how do you make a lot of money but not do a lot of work? Like, that's what I was thinking.
Everybody thinks that.
I want a lot of money. Just do this. And so once I started to make tangible goals, I literally have a notebook that I use up every year. That one of my section is that goal. And I chart the goal, how I'm doing with it. And that has really made the difference for me now. So my own mindset of how I see failure and success is not 2 different things anymore. They are this: I'm going to have failures within success and lots of success within my failures. And then making things bite-sized and above all, they just make me happy now. Like, I'm now doing things in my personal life. I don't take my computer home 3 days a week. I now am utilizing that time. I have 2 wonderful dogs that are very needy, just like me. And so now, like, we are going for 45-minute walks the moment I get in. I am Wednesdays are Wallace Wednesdays. I am
I
doing
love it.
something non-child, non-school related. I no longer have my identity intertwined in teaching. I am now Miss
Oh,
Wallace, my 9 to 5, and I am Christian the rest of the day. And that has true. I wish I had done that sooner. I
yeah.
would
So
have burned out in those ways sooner.
that is so profound. Like, listen, it's not, I'm hearing two different things. So I'm hearing you talking about like knowing that there is a clear line, like you are not just an educator. You're so
Mhm.
much more than that, right? You are Kristen Wallace, a woman, a dog
Mhm.
owner, a daughter, like a friend, like all these things. And they don't have to overlap. Like you can definitely separate your work life from, from who you are as a person. And that is so profound because we have so many educators who are burnt out. Wellness is a real thing in
Mhm.
education, and knowing how to do those two things is really, really important. And so the other thing that I hear you saying is like failure and success, there's this symbiotic relationship between the two. You can't separate them. When you
Mhm.
fail, you learn. That's how it's supposed to go.
And
You're
that's
supposed
successful,
to,
right?
right,
Right.
that you're supposed to go through
Right.
failures in order to learn to become successful, right?
Mhm.
And so how you perceive your failures as the glass half empty and you're taking as this negative thing, that's what keeps you in the sunken place.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Deep in it. Right. Deep in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So there's two different things that I heard you say, and I appreciate you sharing that. So for all of the educators, especially if you're still in the classroom, and you're feeling this sense of overwhelm because November is usually the time. November, December is the time when people don't return to school,
Yep.
and right before spring break is right before like March is the longest month of the year because there's no breaks. There's
Painful.
This is the month. March is the make or break you month,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so right now, a lot of you are feeling this strain of education. And so I would suggest that you try to like sit down, take Wallace's advice, and sit down and think about like, what are the things that separate you from your work, like who you are as a
Mhm.
person, so that you don't become this, I'm just a teacher. You're so much more than that. And commit to days where you do nothing.
Yep.
I work with clients right now, and I tell them all the time, them and their leadership team, I'm like, so well, how many days this week did you go home and do like just put the TV on and spend time with your family? Or
Yep.
like,
Yep.
and they look at me like I have three heads. I'm like, no, this work, you are not sustainable in this work if you do not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the building's not going to burn down. Nobody's going to die.
He
Kids
hasn't
are,
yet. Right.
kids are still going to learn, right?
Yep.
Like none of that
Yep.
stuff is going to matter if you're not well enough to go back and attend to the
Right.
work. So I love that you shared that. Thank you so much. So many nuggets being dropped, y'all. I want y'all to realize this, okay? So listen, this episode was a reminder that leadership, it doesn't have to always come with a title. Okay. Sometimes the person shifting culture, lifting morale, or making the biggest move is right there in the classroom. We have Kristen Wallace as a perfect example of someone who is leading this work, and she's not wearing the title of like a principal, but she's been a coach. She's leading in other ways, in so many profound ways that are so essential to the school. So Kristen Wallace, thank you so much for being that person.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being that person and helping me as a leader too, and for letting us learn today from like learning through your honesty and your growth and your unapologetic brilliance. So just thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And for those of you who are tuning in, if this hit home, I need you to press the share button on this video. It's going to be on YouTube and it's also going to be on Spotify. Tag a teacher. This is one that a teacher should really listen to, okay? Tag a teacher or a leader who needs to hear this. Use your workbook and capture what stood out for you, and then take one action this week to shift how you lead failure conversations in your building, right? To shift that. Remember, it's a symbiotic relationship. And last but not least, I need you to mark your calendars for next Monday's Lead Beyond Limits episode. I'll be joined by another dynamic educator, this time a long-time teacher from Toronto, who will talk about the differences and nuances in education where she is, who's also shaking up what it means to stay rooted in the work while embracing change. So you don't want to miss that. We have, because there's 5 Mondays in March, we have a bonus guest for you next week. So make sure that you tune in for that. And Wallace, thank you so much again for your time, your wisdom. I really appreciate the time that you took with us today.
This was great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hold on. Don't hang up.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I will see you next Monday.